Okay, now we come to the southern colonies. The southern colonies are down here from Maryland, Virginia, North Carolina, South Carolina, Georgia. You'll notice that Virginia extends well past West Virginia. Basically, they claimed a certain amount of coastline, and then they just said it keeps going as far as it can go. Eventually, they'll get cut up. We'll get Kentucky and Ohio as time goes on, and then Tennessee out of North Carolina. But as of right now, it's really just the area on the coast. So Jamestown, of course, we're very familiar with. And then we are sort of familiar with Georgia. Georgia is another big colony because of debtors and indentured servants. So when you are thinking about the South, what you should be thinking about is its its terrain and climate. It is the warmest of the colonies, and it is ideal for growing what is called cash crops. Now, cash crops are, when you think cash, you think money, so it's money crops. These are crops that are going to make money. Normally you can't eat them. For instance, examples would be tobacco, cotton, indigo. Indigo is a kind of blue dye that you can make dresses, make instead of having white or brown clothing, you can color it, make it look nice. So these are things that they're not going to eat, they're going to sell and make a lot of money. Tobacco especially is a huge crop and makes the South very, very rich. So so that's what they're all about. They're about making these huge plantations, and that this is one of your vocabulary words, large plantations, devoted growing mainly one crop, such as tobacco or rice, and later years cotton was added. So these huge plantations were set up as basically the owner's mansion, and then they would have supporting houses for workers, slaves, indentured servants, management, whoever. And then they would manage these huge fields. I mean, you can't see them here, but they're huge fields of basically just one big massive farm. Um, so obviously you have a huge massive farm. You need people to work on them. So first they think, okay, well we'll get the American Indians to do it. Indians run away. They don't want to do it. They don't like being forced to do certain work. I don't blame them. So they get away. So they want they need a lot of workers, so they try getting people from Europe. People don't want to do that kind of work. It's very hot. It's very difficult work. So they offer what is called an indentured servitude, which is right here. It's another one of your vocabulary. Men and women who did not have money for passage to the colonies, who agreed to work without pay for the person who paid for the passage. At the end of their contract, they were freed. So um, indentured servitude is a it's one of those intermediary things. I mean, these people basically were, well, I don't want to say, but I mean, they're basically slaves. But the difference between them and slavery, as we'll see later on in this chapter, is that they chose to do this. They entered into this of their own free will. They decided that life in Europe was not worth it and that they needed to make a new life for themselves. And if they had to pay for that new life by giving up 6 to 10 years of their life to work for somebody, then that's the price that needed to be paid. And when they were done, generally they would be given a small plot of land and out back somewhere, and they're given their freedom, and they can live their life any way that they want. So, unlike slavery, there would be a beginning that they chose and an ending, whereas slavery would just go on and on and on. And we'll get into that later in this chapter. So yes, the land here was very, very good for growing these crops. In fact, this is the only place in the colonies that they can grow these crops. So it became these colonies, especially South Carolina, just be an absolutely rich, rich colony because of these cash crops. Um, Life in the South was very different than the other two areas that we talked about. New England is basically about religion. Um, Mid-Atlantic was about diversity, but here in the South, it was, you know, they stayed true to the Church of England, unlike the other colonies. They liked the English ways and clothing and so forth. Wealthy children, the plantation owners, they were tutored at home just like they were in great houses. Um, but this created a great disparity between the rich plantation owners and the poor workers. This would be the divide would be at its biggest when slavery was introduced. So basically, what happened was the indentured servants, people started realizing that this is not a good way to get to America. Um, Sometimes the plantation owners would cheat you. They'd trump up some charge and add more years to your indentured servitude. And basically, you know, they wouldn't treat them very well. So that dried up. And when it was harder to get indentured servants, that's when they turned to slavery to fill the gap. And you know the rest. Well, we will know the rest of what goes on because of this decision. Um, so cash crops, I went over that. Um, Basically, that's the name of the game here. From Maryland to Georgia. Oh, last name Georgia. As we said before in the beginning of the chapter, we talked about debtors, people that were in debt. They would come here to Georgia and work off their debt as indentured servants, and then they can be free after a while. At least they'll be productive instead of sitting and rotting in some jail somewhere in England. So yeah, it's quite a contrast in and of itself, where there's just such luxury, such a tremendous amount of money, but also great poverty and suffering going on here in the South. Um, but cash crops, great farmland, um, perfect for growing these very difficult crops to grow. They needed a lot of people to grow these crops, so that's how we end up with slavery.